Hello! What I'm about to tell you is my experience for a recent Digimon TCG tournament that I participated in, the EVO-CUP Tournament. Now, for those of you who are unaware, I've recently gotten very into the Digimon TCG, so I was quite serious for this tournament, even going as far as to missing out on uploading that video last week, just to get that little bit of extra practice in. I felt incredibly prepared going to this tournament. Now, for those of you know the short version of the story, no, I didn't win. Sag. Alright, that's the end of the video. Alright, peace guys, see ya! Just kidding. Now, while I may not be particularly happy about the results, my goodness, was that tournament a journey and a very, very fun experience. And I'm here to tell you all about it. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. It's gonna be a long one. Now, to avoid this video being absurdly long, I decided to only show the highlights of my rounds. Here we have our first round in the tournament against Yellow War Greymon, arguably the best deck in the format. The deck I chose to bring is my trusty Black War Greymon deck because it is my main color and the deck I am most comfortable in playing. Game 1 wasn't exactly my strongest game since I was forced to hard play a Greymon in my opening turn, not evolving at all. I seemed to slowly recuperate, but I only had one Mega that entire game, which only died immediately. So, you can probably guess, yes, I lost Game 1 spectacularly. Now, for those of you who are unaware, the Digimon TCG is a best of 3 format, so losing Game 1 does not feel too bad just yet. Moving on to Game 2, I decided to have my opponent go first, and he actually decided to go ahead and -2 security for himself, just to get a little bit of some card advantage while memory choking me, with a Blinding Ray and the Lopmon. It's a good play. But I responded by ramping my way all the way up into an ultimate. My opponent's turn, he then decides to swing with his bodies, which tells me that he's having a bit of a bricky game. I managed to stabilize with my blockers though, however, and just managed to win with the power of Bubblegum Punch and my Craniumon. Game 3, my opponent decides to take the first play, going into Turimon. You can see that we're both choking as much memory to each other as possible, even deciding to use Blinding Ray to play his Tamer while keeping me only at 1 memory. Unfortunately for him, that is exactly what I wanted, as I was setting up a perfect Black War Greymon that could easily wipe his security if I had the final Bubblegum Punch. However, my opponent predicted that I might have had that, so he was trying his absolute best to try to keep me at 1 memory. To respond to that, I decided to attack his security twice thanks to the jamming inheritables from the Greymon and the Toy Agumon reboot. And I was also able to clear his field with my Chaosmon, doing as much pressure as possible. He tries to recuperate with an Angelomon of his own, but luckily with the Dark Side attack, I thwarted a potential War Greymon play, and the game ended with me just constantly putting pressure with my Chaosmon and him healing as much as he could to stall it out, till eventually he finally had no choice but to give me the 2 memory to use my final Bubblegum Punch and win the game. Now we move on to round 2, and surprise surprise, we have Yellow War Greymon once again. Hope you guys get used to hearing that because you'll be hearing that a lot in this tournament. Game 1 was a pretty good game for me. I managed to kill his War Greymon thanks to a Chaosmon and my security. And he did seem to be on track into coming back in this game, but I was very, very proud in this big brain play. By swinging with my Dark Tyrannomon blocker, causing me to end my turn afterwards, it allowed me to ensure that he would be going into his turn with no security whatsoever, which means that War Greymon wouldn't be able to activate its ability to restand and have multiple attacks. Now, of course, that does force my opponent to want to change his game plan. He's decided to go for a more wider board presence playstyle, but thanks to the Alter S that I've been pocketing, it allowed me to clear any attempts of him going wide, sealing Game 1 perfectly for me. Now, Game 2 was just more of a bricky game for me, so you probably guessed it ended me losing spectacularly, so I don't think there's a need for me to show you that. Game 3, however, was a lot more interesting as both sides seem to have been bricking, with both of them hard playing their Tamers immediately. However, the difference between me and him is that I was able to go into my Mega first, allowing me to put the pressure in thanks to the final Bubblegum Punch. I then set up an Alter S in an attempt to slow the game down as much as possible. However, he himself was also setting up a rather scary board with 2 War Greymons, which, if they both live, they could have a potential of 4 attacks on their own, not counting the extra rookies that he'll be able to call thanks to the Angelomon. It is definitely a game-winning formation, but I had faith in the 5 cards on my security. His first attack was coming in with a War Greymon, immediately dying to a Crestgurumon, putting me out of lethal range, and his second War Greymon relentlessly swung at my security, running into an Izzy Izumi, which let me just gain 1 memory, ending his turn, which ultimately just won me the game. However, it should be noted that regardless of me hitting that Izzy or not, he did not have the capability of hitting lethal anymore, and no matter what he did, my Black War Greymon would have been enough to clean the game. So, you can guess I'm feeling pretty good after round 2, beating 2 of the best decks of the format. Feels really good. So now, we're entering round 3, and you can guess I'm feeling pretty good about myself beating 2 of the best decks in the format consecutively. It feels pretty amazing. But little did I know, I was about to be facing one of the most annoying decks in the entire TCG. Security Control. From game 1, I could tell immediately what he was playing, seeing as how relentlessly he was giving me memory. But unfortunately for me, my opening hand was filled with all megas, so I couldn't exactly take advantage of the big amounts of memory he would give me, because if I would just call out a mega hard played, it would just immediately die due to the amount of control option cards that he would be playing. Pretty much, I would be playing his game, which his deck is built for it, and therefore he's able to play his game a lot better than I could attempt. Game 2, however, I had a far less bricky hand, and I was on track to making a Black War Greymon as strong as possible to wipe out my opponent's security in one turn and just win the game. However, the one thing I wasn't expecting there were 2 Terra Forces back to back. The first one I triggered off while I was attempting to put some pressure with my rookies, so I wasn't expecting another one in there, at least not so soon. I lost all of my potential aggression, and I was not able to build back up fast enough in time. A very unfortunate turn of events, but that is just how the cookie crumbles at times for these games. To be fair, I did not have a lot of practice against that matchup, but regardless, he still beat me fair and square. As much as I was shaken up by that last round, I couldn't afford to let that break me, as I still had a good chance of making top 8 so long as I stayed focused. Now we're moving on to round 4. Game 1, unfortunately for my opponent, had a very bricky game. He ends up hard playing the War Greymon, which gave me more than enough memory to put as much pressure on the opponent, which also killing his War Greymon with a Chaosmon, causing him to just straight up concede. Game 2, he was playing a little bit more passively than the previous War Greymon players I fought, but I was going to take full advantage of it by constantly swinging at my opponent's security. The Crescarurumon in combination with the Inheritables allowed me to swing at my opponent's security with Piercing thanks to the Tsunarizumon promo. In the final turns, I managed to take out my opponent's remaining security while taking out my opponent's final blocker with my Chaosmon. This left my opponent with not much else he could do except attempt to clear my board while healing one with the Magna Angemon. However, I had a Gogumon just waiting in my raising area, allowing me to gain that 4000 DP thanks to his Digiburst and Black War Greymon for the game. Defeating that Yellow War Greymon deck so swiftly put a little bit more confidence in me as we approached round 5. And when I looked at this man's mat, I thought to myself, is he another black player? Impossible. Well, lo and behold, it is. I was rather excited, to be honest. It was a breath of fresh air to run into something not yellow for once. His deck is far more passive than mine, however, trying to run as many blockers as possible. This is what we call the black blocker deck. He does, however, have the ability to make his Megas blockers, which is quite scary. We can see that as he goes into his own Alter S to slow me down, while also having the inheritable blocker. Thanks to my Gogumon, though, I was able to swing with my Black War Greymon twice, forcing him to want to take the trade with his Omnimon blocker. Otherwise, I would be getting so much more value with that Black War Greymon. He almost comes back thanks to him using a final Zubagon punch of his own, but thanks to my Gogumon giving that extra power I needed, I got to continuously swing over his blockers, eventually causing him to run out of blockers, which caused me to win game 1. Moving on to game 2, we have a typical board progression on both sides while attempting to memory choke each other as much as possible. Luckily for me though, I set my Izzy Azumi first, allowing me to set the memory tempo. I went into Blitz Greymon, forcing my opponent to revert his ultimate back into a rookie, slowing his game plan down while I was able to consistently put on pressure on the opponent. And while he's attempting to recoup, I put pressure on my opponent with my Blitz Greymon and final Zubagon punch in combination. He managed to slightly turn the tides by going to his own Blitz Greymon and even having his own final Zubagon punch to put the pressure right back at me. But I responded by having a Crescarurumon to make my board as wide as possible so he cannot block all of my possible attacks, which is exactly what happened. I made my Crescarurumon as big as humanly possible to get over his Blitz Greymon blocker, taking out his last security and used Alter S to leave him with only one Digimon, creating a scenario that should be near impossible for him to come back from. You can tell that Gogumon was the MVP for that round. Now, we are approaching round 6. Typically, tournaments like these only last 7 rounds, so I'm feeling incredibly excited and anxious of potentially making the top cut. And would you look at that, my opponent is playing the dreaded Yellow War Greymon. They are definitely not going to make it easy for me. Game 1, I found myself a really good line with my Black War Greymon, and I decided to keep him at raising area for as long as I humanly could, Otherwise, he would be more susceptible to control effects, which is what yellow was known for. Eventually, he goes into his own War Greymon in an attempt to begin pressuring me with damage. However, that is exactly what I wanted. You see, War Greymon requires you to take out one of your own security in order to restand, which is exactly what I wanted. By taking out one of his own security, he put himself vulnerable to a Black War Greymon OTK, which is exactly what happened. Play my final Bubblegum Punch on the Black War Greymon. He will gain 3,000 power until the end of your turn, but he does not have reach 16k, so he does not get a security attack +1 with it. So he's just sitting at a 15 right now.
Okay.
And that costs me 2. I am going to swing at your security for 15 for 2 security, thanks to the inheritable Tsunarizumon. So for 2.
Patamon.
Yep.
And Pulsemon.
And Digiburst 2 to restand. I will swing for that exact same number for 2 security, please.
Yep. And you got it. Game 2. Let's go.
Game 2. Game 2, however, was not as fortunate for me, as I'm forced to hard play the Dark Tyrannomon for 6, turn 1. I do try to retaliate by going into Crest Garurumon, which is pretty good when my opponent goes for a wide board. 1 for 4, putting you at 3. I draw a card, and then I reveal the top 2 cards of my deck because you have 2 Digimon.
Yep.
1 and 2. I cannot call any of these.
Oh, wow. That's tough.
However, the top cards on my deck were uncallable, and I ended up really losing that game due to the pressure and control of his War Greymon. Finally, we're in Game 3, and things are getting spicy. The only way this could go wrong if we have ourselves a bricky game. And believe it or not, we both picked spectacularly even. For the record, my opening hand was 2 Chaosmons, an Alter S, a Bubblegum Punch, and a Toy Agumon. The panic was slowly setting in. I managed to draw some rookies in the early turns, allowing me to put some pressure on the opponent, and even drawing a champion. But even then, there was no ultimate to be found. The only hope I had was to use my Izzy Azumi to stack the top 3 cards on my deck in hopes of finding an ultimate. I might put you to 2, but we'll see what my top 3 cards on my deck are. 1, 2, 3. They're all black.
Holy shit!
I gain 1. Very interesting here. It was horrible. That top 3 pretty much ensured that I wasn't gonna have any progression for the rest of the game, and he had a War Greymon primed and ready.
War Greymon, attack your security, use its effect to add this to my hand and stand it back up.
12k?
Yep.
I'm on deck. Hey, Blitzcrank when you die.
Jesus Christ.
Luckily, the first card of my security was able to kill his War Greymon, and my opponent has been unable to see a rookie all game either. As a Hail Mary, I hard played that Black War Greymon in an attempt to make something happen with my level 7s in hand. Luckily, all my opponent could do in response was hard play his own champion and evolve into an Andromon to slow me down. But I didn't care. I went straight into that Chaosmon to clear his field, and with the Bubblegum Punch in hand for next turn, I set up a checkmate-like board, winning me the match.
I have to play Pitomon from my hand. You go to 4.
I go to 4. I'm gonna draw for turn. I'm gonna move, to stand this boy up, move this up top. Yeah, I'm just gonna hard play final Bubblegum Punch, targeting the Chaosmon. He gets 3,000 power, and he has security attack +1 and reboot. You have 2 security, correct?
Yes.
Okay, this is 17 for 2. With piercing.
Kari.
Yep.
And that's game.
You can imagine the stress that was going through my mind for that game. Having an opening hand filled with nothing but level 7s is not a pretty sight. As I was approaching round 7, I was feeling really good about myself. Pretty much other than that loss at round 3, I was undefeated. I was pretty much telling myself, alright, let's do this! Then, when the pairings were up, I noticed something quite particular in the standings. The one person who beat me actually had a lower score than me, which means that they have more losses than me, which means the chances of me reaching top cut has drastically increased. I was hyped, and I was ready to get this last round over with, baby. And you can bet, as soon as I saw my opponent flip over that purple Digitama, I was feeling good. You see, since the release of Craniumon, this matchup should be heavily favored for Black, since a lot of their control cards no longer work, such as Trump Sword or Hell's Gate. This is shown in Game 1 here, as I had the perfect line for my Craniumon while also having Reboot, meaning I could constantly swing at my opponent without missing out any blocks, allowing me to take Game 1 by a landslide. Game 2 unfortunately did not go as well for me, since I was unable to find a champion at all that game, and not having a Craniumon in sight allowed my opponent to freely control my board as much as they wanted, while also keeping a very aggressive board of their own, which is what Purple is known for. Finally, we move on to Game 3. This is it. It's for all the marbles. Both players have a relatively standard progression. I managed to go into Blitz Greymon just as my opponent went into his Metal Garurumon, slowing his game plan down. He attempts to Memory Star me in response, while building his board relatively wide. However, I went into an Omnimon Ultra S to clean it up. Little did I know, however, that was gonna be my biggest mistake. He slowly builds his Digimon back up while sending his Tamer, while I get to keep on the offensive. Unfortunately for me though, the next card he checked in security was a Deathclaw, which allowed him to kill my Numamon. And on the next turn, he was able to get a lucky draw into a Millenniumon to get rid of my Ultra S. It was looking bleak. My board was reset, but I didn't give up. I turboed my way right back into a Craniumon, which is just what I need to win the game. But there was one key thing that ultimately lost me this game. While the Craniumon had the pressure of 2 security thanks to the Tsunarizamon, in combination with the Gogmamon, by not having Toy Agumon as a Digisource, I missed out too much on the extra blocker value with the reboot. In addition to using my Ultra S too early, he was able to make his board as wide as possible and then just kill me that way. Had I drawn a Toy Agumon, final Zubagon Punch, or him not drawing a Millenniumon, or checking that Deathclaw, I would have been able to win that game. But, unfortunately, everything that could have gone wrong did in fact go wrong. Yeah, so after that round, you can probably guess that I was utterly devastated. In fact, it was the first time in a long time that I ever felt so truly close to being truly salty. Which is kind of strange, because normally I wouldn't ever get like that. In all of my years of playing Cardfight Vanguard, which is over 10 years now, I never ever got truly salty. Maybe a little upset, but even then that was only momentary. I guess my only explanation is that I felt like I truly had a lot more to show for in that tournament. I wanted to prove to everyone that I truly did have what it takes to be the best, like no one ever was. But unfortunately, that's just not the way it turned out. But I guess we'll get them next time. Whew, well, that was a long story filled with ups and downs. You might have even felt like that was an anime tournament arc. I hope you guys enjoyed. Truly, if you guys made it to the end of the video, you guys are real ones. And if you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like and a comment on what you guys felt about my tournament arc. And if you haven't already, maybe consider subscribing. Cause, you know, it's free. And that's a great price.